Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our succession planning webinar that we're hosting today. We have a live audience in Brookings, South Dakota, and we have people joining us from all over the country via Zoom. So welcome very much. Welcome. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and learn a few things about succession planning from our guests today. Our goal is that you take at least one nugget of information that you can take back to your family and your business, you can act on, you can add to your next family meeting agenda, you can say, that's a great idea, we should think about that. It might be, maybe we don't want to go that route. You're going to learn quite a bit today. We will have some time for questions, so if you have those, you can type those in the chat on Zoom, and in the room toward the end, we'll have some time where you can raise your hand. I want to welcome you on behalf of Prairie Family Business Association and our Prairie Family Business Association team. We help family businesses transition to the next generation and thrive through generations. I'm Stephanie Larscheid, the Executive Director, and we have the pleasure of hosting a family today who has been involved with Prairie Family Business Association since our very beginning, 32 years ago. So this family has had 3 generations involved in Prairie Family Business Association. Hard work doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of time. You're going to hear that theme today. Time can be your friend. Keep that in mind. There's a lot that needs to happen in succession planning. It's one step at a time. So I'd like our family to introduce yourselves today. We'll start here and tell us your role in the family and your role in the business.
I am Guy Bender. My role now is chairman of the board, and what else do you want to know? Generation. Oh, I'm G2.
I am Kyle Bender. My role is executive vice president, and I'm G3.
My name's Jay Bender, second generation, and my title is CEO, but I really am more of a board member at this point. So.
And we're missing Jen Barland, and she is also Gen 2. She is unable to be with us today, or excuse me, Gen 3, and she's president of Falcon Plastics. Now, Guy, I'd like you to tell us about Falcon Plastics. Who are you? What do you do?
Okay, we are a custom injection molder and blow molder. Make plastic parts for other manufacturers. We have customers in town here such as Larson Manufacturing, 3M, Daktronics, and across the state we do a lot of work with Raven and Toshiba. We do work with Yeti coolers, Stanley Black & Decker, and various others. We do a little bit of automotive work with various other companies down south, and they are, we're like tier 2. So our company started back in 1975. Jay's and my father and mother started it. They had this great idea of going off and starting a plastics company. So we actually lived in Minneapolis. Mom and dad sold their house, took all the equity, picked up, at the age of 41, picked up the 4 kids, ages 9 to 18, moved out to Brookings, South Dakota, and bought 5 used machines and started this company. So that was a pretty big risk back then. So and today it's grown to, I used to joke with my dad about doing as much sales in a day now as he did his first year, and he told me his first year was around $265,000. Today we're doing about $67 million. We have 4 facilities throughout the country, 270 employees, and these guys are running it now. So Kyle and Jen and their team. So yeah.
Pretty humble beginnings that have evolved to what we know today as Falcon Plastics.
Yes. And how many machines do we have now, Kyle?
We have about 100 machines throughout the 4 facilities in the U.S., Brookings, South Dakota, Madison, South Dakota, Lexington, Tennessee, and Portland, Oregon.
And then also have a partnership in a facility in Suzhou, China, that we own 2/3 of. And Guy and I are still, that's another one of our jobs, I guess. Kyle really helps the management person run that operation, but Guy and I are on the board for the China operation as well as the U.S. operation.
Kyle, tell us about your role and who's involved also day-to-day with you, family-wise.
So my role, Executive Vice President, I'm overseeing a portion of the company, sales, HR, IT, marketing, and finance. Jen oversees basically all the operations, and that's kind of the route she took through the business, working through that, and I kind of took the route that I'm in. So it works out well. The partnership is nice because she has more of the skills on that side. I have more of the skills on this side. And there's a lot of overlap in there too. But in terms of family members that I work with, it's these two and Jen, but mainly Jen. And but we do have 13 shareholders that are all family members. 3 of them are G2. So Jay, Guy, and their sister Deanie. And then we have, we call ourselves the grandkids. So there's 10 grandkids who all own some portion of Falcon Plastics. So it's cool to be able to continue the legacy that my grandfather and grandmother started with all of our generation, the G3, that we can all be part of this, all be shareholders. And we get together for our annual shareholder meeting, and we just had that a few weeks ago, and it's fun to reconnect and kind of give updates on the business to those inactive shareholders. But and they have an interest in it too, so it's kind of fun. They get excited about what we're doing as well.
And maybe just a point on that, our family has used the annual gifting exemption to try to pass some ownership on. And so when Kyle says all 10 G3 members have some ownership, it was all done through gifting. It's not a lot, but I think now G3 owns like 16% of the company or something like that. 16, 17, 18%. But we were able to do that over time. Again, Stephanie talked about time can be your friend. It can also be your enemy as well. So over time, we've been able to do some annual gifting, which is, I think the limit right now is like $17,000. But that's a tool that we have taken advantage of, both from going from G1 to G2 and G2 to G3. It's not the total solution, but it can be a part of a solution on trying to pass that ownership on. And our parents, the grandparents, when originally they would not allow you to own any shares in the company unless you were active in the company. As they got closer to passing, which they did pass a few years ago, they decided that maybe the legacy would be really good for their grandkids to have a little piece of the action. And so Guy and I agreed with that. And because they didn't own any, they had to actually buy shares from the company to gift to the grandkids. So we allowed that to happen, and I think it's been good in the long run. So
Now, today, Jay and Guy, you're more in an advisor capacity. Jay, I understand you have an office still in your new corporate office setup. If you want to speak to that, and then you have roles on the advisory board as well, correct?
yeah, so when we turned over the leadership piece of the business, Guy and I, don't come into the office as much. I probably come in more than he does, but I stay out of their hair. I don't get involved in the day-to-day stuff unless they ask us to. I didn't even want an office in the new corporate office building that we built, but there was an extra office, so they're like, yep, you get an office. Now, at our last advisory board meeting, I found out that they're looking at potentially adding another corporate position and hiring somebody. They didn't say that they're gonna kick me out of my office, but pretty sure that's gonna happen. So, but that's fine. The way our office is set up, if we want to come in, we still can, but, that's just the way that is, so.
Kyle, talk about coming into the business. You have a family employment policy, if you want to talk about what that is, and then your path and journey, and Jen's as well.
Yeah, so the journey, I always like to tell the story. Jen and I started off as paper shredders when we were about 8 and 6 years old. And that was our job. We'd come in with our dads, and we'd shred paper for a few hours, earn a few bucks, and then blow it all at the bowling alley. And and so that was our first introduction to Falcon Plastics. Obviously, as we aged, we had more responsibilities, but we've worked in a lot of different capacities. I remember working in maintenance for a long time. We've both been assemblers, operators, working kind of in every level of the business, moving up into the tool room. In college, post-college, I started off in the engineering area, really kind of heading up our 3D printing and learning how to work with customers, quote products, and then both Jen and I, shortly after graduating college, we both worked at Falcon Plastics for a couple years, and then it was encouraged to go get outside experience, which was really valuable for us. And I went and worked in the banking sector for a couple years, got some, call it sales experience, and after a few years of that, came back to Falcon Plastics. There was a sales opening, took that, kind of jumped in, and that's kind of where I got a lot of my sales experience and why I have a strong passion for that right now, and I still probably spend 50+% of my time focusing on sales just because that's where I like to be. And so I was in sales and then took the next step of kind of overseeing the call it technology portion of the business, since I had that engineering background from when I first came out of college. I was overseeing our tooling engineers, tooling department, and still keeping my feet wet in sales. And then after doing that, we went into the leadership transition in 2020 and 2021. That's when I became the executive vice president and really kind of broadened the scope of what I did. Still keeping that technology and sales piece, but adding the pieces like marketing and finance. So Jen took a somewhat similar path in a different area. So she came out of college working at Falcon Plastics, did that for a couple years, left, and she worked with actually a consultant group that we still work with today and were working with at the time. She moved to Detroit to go work with their team, helping collect data and consult with other similar type businesses, non-competitive businesses for obvious reasons, but worked with a lot of tool shops, which we work with, and helped kind of consult with them, go into their facilities. She met a lot of people in our industry, which was really valuable to her, I know, and then came back. And the way she came back was really interesting. We had an opening in our Tennessee facility for a production manager, and she just filled out an application. Didn't tell anybody. and when they got it, they thought it was a joke, actually. And so they had called, and then she kind of had to spill the beans of, yeah, I did apply for that. I am serious. I do want that, and I'll move to Tennessee. And so she interviewed and requested no special treatment, and she was very qualified to do that job. And so they gave her that job. She worked there for about a year and then moved up back to South Dakota because we were starting to get ready for our transition plan. But before that, she worked in Madison for a while, and then she was the plant manager of our Brookings facility for a couple years as well. And then from that, she moved into the role of president.
So an interesting path that you both took, intentional in a lot of ways on what you were trying to do, because your last name matched the last name of the owners, and you knew you had to prove yourself and kind of make your own path along the way. And I think it's really interesting what you guys did. Talk about your family employment policy, if one of you'd speak to that, on your spouses, on education requirements.
Yeah, I can do that. So what we want is if there's a family member that wants to come in the business, we want them to get some type of post-secondary education that's relevant. That could be pretty broad, but at least get some type of post-secondary education. Go get some experience elsewhere. I think that just gives the opportunity to bring some different knowledge back into the company, and also I think gives you the knowledge that you don't just have to work for the family business. You can go work somewhere else and make it. So I think it builds you up inside a little bit too. But we want those types of things. And then you would need to apply for a job that we needed. I mean, we're not, just because your name's Bender doesn't mean that we're going to have a spot for you when you want to come back. You got to come back and go into a spot that you're qualified for and that we need, and then prove yourself from there. So that's kind of how that works. We do have a policy too where we don't really want spouses to be active in the business. And I could go into the history of why we do that, but I'm not going to do that. But it's just something that we've done that, my mom did work alongside my dad, but the company's different today. When they started, there was 3 people. They bootstrapped this thing. It's all hands on deck. Guy and I worked there, and you know how much we got paid. We did get fed, I guess, and we had a place to sleep, but we didn't make a dime. I think these guys at least got a quarter for every bag of paper they shredded. We worked for free, until we were old enough to take a real job. So
Oh, and by the way, throughout high school, we both worked second shift, which is 4 to midnight every single Friday.
well, I think when I was a senior, I worked Monday through Thursday as well, but they let me get off at 10 because I had school the next day. So, but we were happy to do it. Back then it was like our parents didn't have any money. They took everything they had to start the business. So if we wanted something, we had to earn it. And they did pay us then when, at that point. But my dad was also opened up a facility up in Aberdeen before this that still exists today in the same industry. And so we had some knowledge. I think I was in 8th grade when he opened that up, and we actually moved there and slept in the factory, and I ran the machines and stuff, but there was no compensation for that either, which is fine. I got really good experience.
You're in the unique position of having gone through a G1 to G2 transition and now a G2 to G3 transition, and you've been intentional that there are some things you want to do the same the second time around, and there are things that you want to do very differently. So speak to that, the difference between those generational transitions and why.
So I'll try to do this, but you guys can fill in if I miss anything. But when we went from G1 to G2, the company was a little bit smaller. It was just siblings. Guy and I were really the only 2 that were in a position to try to take leadership responsibility, and nobody wanted to make that decision of how this was going to work. We actually hired an outside psychologist to come in and put us through the ringer. 360 reviews, psychological analysis and all this stuff, and everybody decided at the end of the day we're going to let this outside person make the decision. And he got done and he goes, well, the good news is you've got 2 people capable of running this company. Bad news is I'm not making the decision for you. And so Guy and I stepped off to the side and we figured out how to move forward ourselves. And it was kind of a brute force deal, but we became really good partners and worked together and ran the company as partners, just like we're expecting Kyle and Jen to do the same thing. It doesn't matter who has what title. If we're both capable and we both want to lead the company, that's how we did it, and we see this is the way that Kyle and Jen are moving forward as well. So on the ownership side, when we made the transition from G1 to G2, we had a partner originally of Raven Industries that owned half the company. When we joined the family business, it was at that time called the Family Business Initiative when it first started back in the early 90s. That's what got my parents to start thinking about actually starting to gift some shares to the next generation. So we had started passing ownership on, obviously very slowly, but the company was smaller, so it was a little bit easier to do back then. But it got to the point when we needed to get Raven out of the way. Actually, my dad had negotiated with Raven to sell the company to them. And I always wondered why he didn't follow through on that. That was in 1997. Guy and I were very active in the business, getting close to taking over the business at that point. He wanted to retire. And he got cold feet because he found out what they were going to do. They basically were going to, just make it a part of Raven, and got the leadership. And I don't think he finally told me that only a couple of years before he passed. I thought maybe my sister said something to him, but that wasn't the case. So, but anyways, he flipped it around and said, "Okay, we're going to buy you for the price I negotiated to sell to you for," which I guess is probably about as fair as you can get. So the company had to buy Raven out in 1997, had to buy half the company from them, took a great big bank loan out and leveraged the company. Then 6 years later in 2003, my parents wanted to get bought out. And so at that time, they had gifted to us, but they still owned half the company. So 6 years later, we had to buy half the company again. We used subordinated debt, a promissory note to them that was subordinated to the bank, and that we had 15 years to pay it off. So really our company was cash strapped and leveraged highly from 97 probably through 2013, maybe 2015, when we paid them off a little early. But it was probably at least through 2012 that we were really kind of reeling from that. Guy and I when we went to buy new equipment, we didn't go to buy new equipment. We only went to auctions and bought used equipment because no one would ever borrow us the money for new equipment because we were too leveraged. So that's kind of how it went from G1 to G2. G2 to G3, I'm hoping at the end of the day is going to be a lot different. We're much more intentional. We really made a concerted effort to split this into two pieces. There's leadership transition and there's ownership transition. And they're two completely different things. And we really thought it makes more sense to do the leadership piece first, because who wants to pass a business on to somebody who doesn't want to be there or doesn't have the capabilities to run the company. So we have been using gifting, that annual exemption I talked about. We've been doing that already with Kyle and Jen and other G3 members. Probably for the most part, all non-voting shares. Guy and I still have complete control of the company. But we really worked hard on this leadership piece. So the Prairie Family Business Initiative was really helpful, or Prairie Family Business Association, very helpful to us in this. We've gotten Kyle and Jen more involved in that. We have an industry group that's been really helpful to us. We started an advisory board and brought some outside members onto that board. We treat it like a board of directors. We meet quarterly, we keep minutes, we have an agenda, we parade our management teams through that, and it's been good for our managers, and it's been good for Kyle and Jen, and I think it's been good for Guy and I too, to get some outside perspective on running the company and kind of helping them with leadership and even with some of the ownership transitions. So I think we can put a check mark next to the leadership transition from G2 to G3. I think it went pretty well. and these guys are really running the company on a day-to-day basis. The ownership piece is in process. We have a plan. We're working with some outside groups. We'll be using trusts to do this instead of having to have the company pay Guy and I off and strap it again like we did from G1 to G2. We're going to try to do this differently. These guys are running the company better than Guy and I did. They're more organized. They're using data better. They're really, I think our sales team is really gelling really well in bringing opportunities to the company. So we have the opportunity to grow. To grow, you also have to have funds and money to support that growth. And so if we can either use all that money to buy Guy and I out, or we can do this different. So we're trying to do it a little bit differently to make this transition less painful for the company, less painful on our balance sheet. We took the equity in our company down to $20,000 when we went from G1 to G2. We would have taken it, my dad wanted to take it negative, but I guess the IRS doesn't let you do that. So, so we paid a higher interest rate to get him what he needed, but we got there.
The advisory board that you talked about has been a key piece of your transition, and I'm sure, Kyle, for you and Jen, that has been probably a relief to have this team of outsiders say, have you thought about this? Where's the vision here? Here's an obstacle you might be facing in the industry. And I know that was something that was talked about in board school that Jay and Guy participated in with the Prairie Family Business Association. You touched on that. You also talked a lot about your shareholders and getting your how many is it, shareholders?
13.
13 shareholders aligned, and I think what you said in February was a great success in the attendance that you had in your shareholder meeting. So talk a little bit more about your shareholders who are not active in the company and how you're communicating and all of that.
So I want to touch on the advisory board real quick too, because of what you said. So we do have those 3 outside members on our advisory board, and I think that's really important. To have people who don't see what you're doing every single day to be able to give input of what they think you should be doing, and who those people are also really important. And we were really intentional of who we selected to be on that board. So we have one person who's an industry expert. He's been in our industry his entire career, has ran businesses and facilities several times larger than ours. And he's a part of the consulting group that we work with. So we're really familiar with him as well. And he's really been a mentor to me, but especially Jen. And that was the company Jen went to work for when she moved to Detroit. And so he's been a really pivotal part of her growth. And then another one of our board members has been a long-term supplier of ours, and we've known them and that company for years. And so the knowledge that he can bring to us in terms of materials, which is our largest cost, is really valuable. And he's been my main mentor. So he's really more sales focused just with the industry he's in and the business that he's in. He's really been a big mentor to me. And then the third outside member is another family business. And so he runs a family business in a similar industry. It's still manufacturing, it's metals manufacturing, but he goes through or has went through a lot of the same things that we have. And so getting all those different perspectives on one board has been really important to us, and having mentors that Jen and I can trust and utilize has been really important as well. So that's above and beyond the board duties. They've been helping us outside of that too.
I think too, the other thing to mention on that is these outside board members are also connected with our management teams at each facility and our corporate group. And so I think they were more cautious at first. They're like, we just got to report to somebody else. We got to regurgitate the same information over again. But I think they've really started to grow to see the knowledge they can gain from these people. Yeah, yes, they hold us accountable. Yes, they challenge us. But I think I think at this point our management teams would all say having these outside people on our board has been valuable to them as well and to the company.
It brings some fulfillment to what you're doing and more of a challenge, and we want to be as good as these other companies throughout the country as well. And then do you want to touch on shareholders, some of your intention to bring your shareholders together, your Zoom meeting that you had in February as well?
Yeah, so every year, at least once a year, we'll do a shareholders meeting to kind of give updates, because not everyone's involved in the company. They all have their own lives, their own jobs, and a lot of them live nowhere near Brookings. And so they like to get updated on where Falcon Plastics is at. It's part of the legacy, like we talked. They do want to be a part of it. They can't be a part of it on a day-to-day basis just based on how they want to live their lives. But they do want to know how it's doing. What is this piece of our family legacy doing, and how is it performing? And so we do a similar presentation to all of our employees. It's maybe slightly more in depth with our shareholders, but we talk about how the business went, how each customer is doing, or at least our top 20 to 80% or 20 to 40% of our customers. How are they growing? How's our relationships with them evolving throughout the years? And then what are we doing specifically in each facility to make it better and keep on building that family legacy?
It's great and important for family relations, and it won't be too long before there'll be G4 considerations to start to take into account. You went on the Prairie Family Business Retreat in 2021, and it was the four of you, the three of you, including Jen. Talk about what that did for you as the four of you as a unit, and what it did for your planning, and what it spurred into motion for you.
Well, G and I had been talking about it, but I think going to that really kind of kick-started it a little bit more. We had a lot of nice discussions that maybe tough discussions that we made it through.
Yeah, I would say from my perspective, and probably Jen's as well, that was really the event that got us talking. There was conversation, but it was always kind of surface level. That event forced us to dive deep, and that's why we did it. We knew that's what we wanted to do. We knew that's what we needed to do. But that event really turned into, we had just started the leadership transition at that point, or maybe we're putting the finishing touches on how that looked. But we hadn't even scratched the surface of the ownership transition, and it was something Jen and I were curious about. Obviously, there wasn't a rush to do it, but we were curious. Hey, what is the plan? Because we knew what happened from G1 to G2. Is that the same plan? How can we prepare for this? And it's their decision, and that's kind of what Jen and I had told each other all along. This is their decision. We're going to make it work however they want it to work, but we need to know how they want it to work. And so that's really what we went into that retreat wanting to know. And I think we came out of that retreat with a good plan of how we can start getting into this a little more and doing something meaningful towards the ownership transition.
It all boils back to communication in one way or another. And when you have an opportunity as a family to be at a retreat, whether that's 1 day or 3 days, you're there. You don't have distractions. You don't have the business that you're trying to take care of. You're just there, and any questions on the table. You can ask anything that's on your heart or your mind, and you'll be able to talk it out together with the aid of a facilitator. And I know that was really valuable for you, and it gave you some to-do lists that you're probably still working on today, 2 years later.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. We're still working on it. But we had a facilitator, and I think that, like Kyle said, it really made us get into the weeds a little bit on this, and I think that was probably the best thing that we got out of it. Is when we walked out, we were pretty aligned before we went in, but we maybe didn't know that. But after we came out of it, we could see, okay, we're really aligned here, and we have a to-do list or a plan moving forward, and that I think was really valuable, and we're still working on some of that stuff.
I think the other thing, everybody's busy. And to try to get 4 super busy people together at the time is almost near impossible. So to take those days off and just, this is all we're doing, really was very, very helpful. Agatha did a wonderful job with us. So yeah, that was a very good kickstart to where we are today.
It's great to hear the outcomes of that. We tap into some national research from one of our sponsors, Generation 6, and there's 3 key indicators for family business success. And those are family meetings, communication, strategic planning, and a board. And those 3 things, when you're working on those diligently and put them into place, they will lead to good success. We've had some questions come in about spouses and involvement of spouses. Can you talk about spouses? Are they shareholders at all? Talk about their involvement.
Yeah, right now, no. There's no spouses that are shareholders. In our shareholder agreement, if you were to get divorced, the shares cannot go to the spouse. It's your responsibility to figure out if you can hang on to those shares or if you have to turn them back in the company to get cash. But that's just what our current shareholder agreement says. We do know we probably need to update our shareholder agreement because our shareholder agreement currently also says no G4 members can be owners. Okay? And we have a G4 member that is 17?
Yeah. Yep.
So anywhere from an infant to 17, I guess, G4. So we know this is another thing on our to-do list. Unfortunately, this is a never-ending battle, it seems like. But that's we need to probably do some work on our shareholder agreement. But that's currently what it says. I think our father started that rule, there was just some family dynamics that he just decided we don't want to get into this. And like I said earlier, I think when you're a really small company, it'd be a dumb rule to have. I wouldn't say that that's a good idea because it's usually all hands on deck, and that's the way it was in G1 for us, the founding generation. But this rule wasn't implemented until G2 came along, and it probably gets even, maybe worse as you get to G3 and G4. There's just the numbers start to grow, and so you have to start finding the ways to make sure that you don't hurt the business in the process. At the end of the day, your business has to run well. It has to be managed well. It has to run well. Has to grow, and so you got to make sure that some of these family dynamics don't throw roadblocks in front of that. And I think that's why that rule was implemented initially.
And grandpas and grandmas can make the rules and change the rules. That's their privilege. We have some questions about leadership, how you have passed along kind of your skills to Jen and Kyle, and you talked about mentors, Kyle, and kind of how you're intentional about your leadership.
So I'll maybe let Jay and Guy talk about how they passed on their skills, but Jen and I have done a lot, and we've had many people in our business help us with being intentional with leadership. So we have mentors that we work with. Obviously, we have Jay and Guy. Our grandpa was a very big part of our leadership journey as well, but also different programs and organizations that we've been a part of and taken advantage of. There's a lot of different leadership training. There's books. There's organizations. There's schooling. And if you're intentional about what you want to learn and what you go out to search for, you're going to learn it. And so that was the main thing, is we wanted to learn these skills, and we were intentional of finding what was purposeful to us. And that's really what it takes, is knowing what you want and researching what's going to give you that skill set and just going out and doing it.
I can say, how did Jay and I pass on our wonderful skills? First of all, we worked beside, both Jen and Kyle for many years. And as the business grows, just like our father probably couldn't have run it like Jay and I did because it's different. Today, the business is different again. And these guys have different skills. They use data a lot. That's something Jay and I were just touching on a little bit. But now the business is run by data. And they understand that better than we do. And, they're doing a far better job. But they're learning that from, going on outside sources and learning skills that way too. So
I think too, get involved with some things outside of your business, so I think both Kyle and Jen are involved with some volunteer organizations. In fact, I think Kyle, you're I don't know if it's the president or chair of the local chamber this year. You run a board. You're basically chairman of the board at that point, so you get some experience that way. They've gotten some good experience through the industry group or through the consulting group that we use. They do some leadership things. Kyle's in a peer group. I think that can help with leadership ideas, or how are other people tackling some of these issues that you might have to deal with. So there's no necessarily one right answer here, but I think if you seek out and maybe find some people who you respect how they operate, if you can just talk to them or observe them, you can even see maybe the type of leadership styles. We really like to push the kind of the servant leader style, that we're here to try to support all of our employees, from the people out on the production floor through our top managers, and kind of almost invert that chart a little bit, that you're at the bottom and you're carrying everybody else, and you need to do it in a humble and positive way. And so that's kind of the style I think that Guy and I used. When you're the founder of a company, it's kind of you can be a dictator if you want to, because you don't have to consult with anybody. You don't have to have a board. You don't have to ask anybody. You can just make those decisions. But when you get into G2 or G3, you've got other people. You've got other shareholders. You've got other people involved. There's always a lot of stakeholders. And so the style that you use can matter. And so I think that's something Jen and Kyle, I think, had probably a lot better training than even Guy and I did. And I know for me, the first time I had people working for me was when that's when I felt like I got thrown to the wolves a little bit. But I came back to the company. I was an engineer. I came back. I never had anybody work for me, and they put me in charge of the tool room. And, so all of a sudden I got people that are counting on me, and that kind of opened my eyes a little bit to what a leader needs to be.
From a leadership perspective, I think it's really interesting how you share your financials all the way through your organization. Talk a little bit about that, how you're giving information to every employee, and then how you're rewarding on that too.
So similar to our shareholder meetings, we hold state of the business meetings with every employee every year, and it's always grouped by shifts and facilities. We're actually in the middle of that right now. I've got one more facility to do. But so we go around, and like I said, it's a very similar presentation of what we give to our shareholders. We don't necessarily just lay out a P&L and say, here's everything. They're not interested in that anyway. But they are interested in, who's our top customers, who grew, who went down, what challenges are the other facilities facing, what was some cool things that the other facilities excelled at. What's our plan for this year? Where did we fall short last year? Where did we excel last year? Were we close to budget? Were we not? And so we go over, it's just a multitude of things that we go over with all the employees. Some of them are probably really interesting to them. Some of them are probably very boring, but they're important anyway. And so at the end of that presentation, though, is probably the coolest part, and honestly why they all come to the meeting, is we do profit sharing in our company. So we take a chunk of our profits before tax every year and pay that out to our eligible employees. And so it's meant to reward tenure in the company. We do have eligibility requirements, but they're pretty simple. You just have to work there for the whole year. And so we pay that out in a point system to all the employees. It's been a program we've been doing for over 40 years now. And it's really cool to be able to do that as a family. It is one of my favorite times of the year where I get to go around and share that number with the employees. That's always the big question walking, what's the number going to be? What do you think it is? And so we'll share what their number is, what the average in the company is, what some of the other facilities did, and there is a sharing aspect too. So the number that they get is 50% based on how they performed and 50% based on how all the other facilities perform. And so there's a lot of, hey, how can I help them be better? Because that is going to directly affect me. And so that's kind of a really cool part of what we've implemented with this, is there's a lot of synergies between the facilities as well. So they are interested in how everyone else is doing. It's not just me here, it is us.
I'll also say this. I know our father didn't really share financials with anyone. And it's a tough thing to do because you worry, this and that. But we started doing that, and it really opened a lot of people's eyes and understood that this is what I can do to make this company better that I'm working for. And we call ours is the Falcon family. And so how do we all work together to make this a better place? And it's amazing what that does. All the profits that this company makes, we all dump back in. I think we've taken out once. That's it. In 49 years. So, yeah, it all goes back in to buy better equipment or whatever. So, yeah.
Help fuel that growth.
Yes.
A pretty special program for many reasons, and for your employees, and says a lot about who you are and your values and how you're that's going out to all of your employees and stakeholders. Jay, I know and now we're kind of in our question and answer time, so if anyone has any questions in the audience, you can raise your hand. We'll bring you a microphone. If there's any in the chat, I have access to that too. You've served on a couple of other family business boards yourself, Jay. Talk about that experience and how that's made you be a believer in what a board can do for a family business.
Yeah, I've served on 3 other family business boards, probably over the last 25 years. Sioux Corp in Beersford was the first one. And these were all actual board of directors, not advisory boards, so we had fiduciary responsibility. But that one is a smaller company, maybe 50 employees, but they asked me to be on that board, I think primarily because of my family business experience. That was the Finger family. Only one active shareholder, and there was, I think, some struggles between the active shareholder and some of the inactive ones. So they wanted to professionalize their board. I think what was happening before is they would have family squabbles at the board meeting, and if you bring outsiders in, you're probably not going to do that. And so that was the idea. They brought in 3 outside people that all had family business experience. It professionalized the meetings. It raised expectations for the company, and the company started performing better. And I remember at one point there was a certain percentage. We said, you should be able to hit this bottom line percent. And the owner who was running is like, there's no way we can do that. And by the time we left, that he was always hitting that number or better. So I think the outside board helped raise that expectation. And then I was also on the WCCO Belting. It's the Shorma family up in Wahpeton, North Dakota, for about 6 years. Both of those two boards I got off from because they sold the companies, one to the managers and the other one to a competitor. And now I'm currently on Valley Queen Cheese board up in Millbank, which is a much larger business as far as sales goes, but they have a few more employees than we do, but it's all in one location, and it's in the food business. But I think they brought me on because of the family business, success of Falcon and the family business aspect. And then we have multiple facilities, and someday maybe they will, maybe they won't, but I think just wanted to get, some different experience on their board. It's been an advantage, I think, for me. I can go and watch these boards. I can learn from them. I can see how they run their board meetings, how they, interact with the management teams, maybe learn some best practices. I always feel like I probably get just as much out as I give back on these boards. And so I think it's helped me at least be able to maybe help these guys with the advisory board a little bit. And then Guy and I went to board school as well, through the Prairie Family Business Association, and got another nice list of to-dos there too that we maybe still haven't made as much progress on that, but I think there is. I watched how Valley Queen interacts with their non-active shareholders, and I think they do a really, really good job, and I think there's some things for us to learn from them as well on how we interact with our non-active shareholders. So more work to do, but it's been a good experience for me to kind of be on that other side and maybe help a couple other businesses. So,
and there's always something to learn from that board experience, and to become a higher performing board, a higher performing company, a more cohesive family. And that's what board school helped to instill in you. Our next board boot camp will be April 16th. And so that's an opportunity to help you either put your board together or get to be that higher performing advisory board or fiduciary board.
And my understanding is Ken Carls, who is the chairman of the board for Valley Queen, will be one of the presenters at that session, correct?
Yes, correct.
And he does a great job. If you want to learn a little bit more about how to run a board, he'll at least be one of the people that'll be speaking. So
yes, he'll be very good. A question came through on, do you have any strategic education or guidance that you're doing for the next generation for them to join in and carry on the business?
At this point, just given their ages, we haven't. There's some not even in school yet. We mentioned there's a 17-year-old. I'm not sure what his path is going to be in life. I don't know if he's chosen that or not. It's not something we're pushing anyone to do. We want, if this is the path that they want, we want them to choose that.
But we probably do have work to do with exposing. It's easier to get exposed to the business when you're growing up here. Now some of these G4 members are, some of them may not have ever even been in the facility, so there is probably some work for us to do there on how do we expose them to what we're doing and maybe what opportunities there could be for them if they wanted to.
And as we've talked about, maybe that's perhaps in a family business retreat type atmosphere that we can help give you some programming on for those next gens. And at that young age, it's so much about passing on the values. And this is why we're in business. This is how we treat our employees. This is what our business does, and making it appealing and inspiring. We are wrapping up for questions. We have a question in the room. Yeah.
Thanks, guys, for taking time and being so open with us and helping us out in these family questions. I have one for you. How did you handle key employees' questions and uncertainty during the leadership transition period?
Well, there was, I think, quite a bit of communication that way. I don't think anybody was caught off guard with what we were doing. And for the most part, I think we had pretty good support, but a lot of communication. if there was somebody who was unsure, I think we had one person who was, I think, unsure of what their future, how they were going to fit in, what their future would be. That was probably the most challenging one, a really important person to our business too. And so that, just took some time. And I think both Kyle and Jen took some responsibility in working one-on-one even with that person and talking to them and getting them comfortable. I know I did spend a lot of time with that person as well, trying to get, help them feel comfortable with what was going on. But I think, again, time is your friend. You can kind of ease into this, communicate what you're wanting to do with your key people, and being open with them and having them be open with you too. If they really have a concern, let them share it with you in a non-threatening way that you can try to talk through it and get them comfortable. And I think at this point now, we've been through this, since from 2020 till now, so 3.5 years probably, maybe coming on 4 years. We haven't had any turnover due to this. And the one person I was referring to, I think, is just loving it, and I think is a right-hand person for both Kyle and Jen, the way they were for Guy and I as well. So, but yeah, there's concerns when you do that. I think, you never know what they're going to think. And I also think Kyle and Jen paying their dues and working their way up in the company made a difference too. If it would have just been a deal of, oh, hey, I'm making my kid in charge, they don't know what they're doing, but it's going to be awesome, then that might be a problem, So I think taking the time to do it right and getting them the experience and getting your key people comfortable with that person and giving them chances to build a relationship with each other would be my advice or suggestion there.
Both our kids, both Kyle and Jen, are very, very capable of running this company. And, for people, change is hard, and it's just something you have to work through. So we did communicate. We had meetings on meetings on meetings I had with our leadership team talking about this, for a year or two. So
most of them were pretty excited about getting Guy and I out of the way, to be honest. So.
Well, thank you so much. If you want to weigh in on another question, go ahead. I'll just make a couple of announcements from Prairie Family Business's standpoint, too. What we have coming up next is our annual conference, which is one of the largest and highest value family business conferences in the nation. And that's on April 17th and 18th, and there are virtual tickets still available for that. The day before, we're hosting 3 pre-conference programs, one of which will be Board Boot Camp, another which will be Farm Family Forum, and that one will be a hybrid event broadcast virtually. And then we'll have a business acceleration workshop for those wanting to grow, mature their operations, and the ceiling is the limit. There is no limit. That's what that will be for. If you want to ask a final question.
Sure. Thank you guys for being here today. So you guys spoke earlier a little bit about the ownership transition and not wanting to cash strap the company. And I'm just curious about what tools you are using to do that, to get your equity out of the company without the company having to borrow money or put them in a bad situation. Are there multiple tools or different tools that you're using to get your equity out without hurting the existing company?
Yeah, so maybe a couple things. We're still on payroll, okay? So we're still getting paid, and that's kind of nice. Not having to work as hard and still get it. We've cut back. We don't take bonuses, or we're not part of profit sharing, but we still at least have money to pay our bills. So we're using trusts. So we're probably going to not pull the equity out of the company per se, but we may do it through dividends or distributions. I shouldn't say dividends, distributions. We're an S corporation. And so when we put the shares in the trust, the distribution will go to the trust, but we have the opportunity to pull funds out of the trust as well as if we need them, for living, for doing whatever it is that we want to do. Our goal would be to not have to cash shares in or sell shares, that we could actually leave those shares in the trust, which really would leave that equity in the trust. We're only putting non-voting shares in the trust. We kind of reorganized the company so there's not very many voting shares anymore. And those voting shares then will pass to Kyle and Jen, either through annual gifting or through our will. So we'll still have control of those trusts, along with Kyle and Jen, until we pass. And so that just a little bit different strategy, maybe not as, it might not work for everybody. I think with Guy and I, we think we can pull this off and still live the lifestyle that we want to live. Certainly if we would just go sell the company, we'd be in a lot better place financially. We could go do what we want, but we've never, like Guy said earlier, we've always put the proceeds of the company back in. And so we've never really lived a high and crazy lifestyle anyways. I don't know why we're going to want to start doing that now, other than maybe get to travel a little bit or something like that, So, but that's kind of the strategy that we think we can make work, is to not try to pull that equity out and to use these I don't know how long they'll leave us on the payroll, but as long as we're on the board, maybe we can still be on the payroll, right? So, but that's kind of kind of a couple things. I don't know, Guy, if there's anything more you want to add to that, but that's what we're looking at doing.
Yeah. And we do go out there, we do add value to it, and we still have meetings that we all have. So it's not a stretch. We don't get paid as much as we used to, but we still take a little bit out anyways.
Great question. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it on behalf of all of us at Prairie Family Business Association, and we'll be sending you follow-up communication after today's webinar. Thank you.